This is Michael Popok, so it must be Legal AF After Dark. Sentencing of Donald Trump comes up on July 11th. A lot of information has to be processed and synthesized and collected and delivered to Judge Merchan. He's the only person with full discretion to impose the sentence. We have an interview of Donald Trump as part of the process, a deep dive dossier created by the probation department, recommendations by the prosecutors, recommendations by the defense. And the judge sits atop it all, including an evaluation of all the bad conduct by Donald Trump inside and outside the courtroom. We discuss it all under New York law, the only way we know how to do it, on the MeidasTouch Network on Legal AF. Take a listen.
Well, look, we're headed towards the July 11th sentencing date. Lots of people debating whether or not Donald Trump is going to be thrown into prison based on being a convicted felon. You and I have discussed that matter at length. We've also discussed it with Karen Freeman Agnifilo, the former number 2 at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. It should be noted that if you were probably to go back 2 years ago or so, maybe more, when you and I really ramped up Legal AF, and it's existed for longer than that. But as things were really ramping up and you and I were saying that, look, we think there are going to be criminal charges brought against Donald Trump. We think that there are going to be these civil cases brought. I think the prevailing narrative out there is that's never going to happen ever. I remember very distinctly when we had Alvin Bragg on a interview with Karen Freeman Agnifilo, there were a lot of criticisms directed his way, would be putting it lightly, from people who were watching and saying, no, you're weak, you're not doing the right thing. And, all we were saying is, I don't think that you are following all of the data, because the data points aligned with pretty much where we are today. And where we are today is that Donald Trump is a convicted felon on 34 separate felony counts, number one. Number two, in the various civil cases, he has over $500 million in judgments against him. What's a bit hard to predict if you are law and order people like you and me, although it is, kind of clear to see the direction of where this Republican Party has gone. I mean, I think it would have been hard to predict just how obsequious that they were going to be, that they would actually have MAGA Republican members of Congress who are supposed to be a co-equal branch get quite literally dressed up by Donald Trump in outfits that he wanted them to wear, with Donald Trump ties, with Trump's face on their ties, and that they would invite Donald Trump back after becoming a convicted felon to Washington, D.C. And as he rants about Hannibal Lecter and says how much he hates the city of Milwaukee, and how he makes these just odd and false statements about potentially being in romantic relationships with Nancy Pelosi, and says that that's what Nancy Pelosi's wacko daughter told him. And, just the disparaging remarks about Nancy Pelosi's daughter lying about romantic relationships with her. And then the MAGA Republicans, give him standing ovations as he's saying things like that. I think that's a little bit harder to, I wouldn't say harder to predict. I think it's a little bit harder to stomach that exists. But, here we are right now, and now Trump's meeting with his probation officer. I want you to tell us about that meeting. And we're heading towards sentencing. And if Justice Merchan, who's a law and order judge, follows the law, there will be prison time. Does that mean Trump will be serving time in Rikers or home confinement? That's a little bit where I think there's some ambiguity and there's a significant debate. But I think that Justice Merchan, when he applies the factors, is the person showing remorse, prior conduct, severity of the crimes, behavior during the trial, behavior before the trial. I think you put that data into all the inputs. You're a law and order judge. You have to order some form of incarceration or home confinement for not an insignificant period of time. But walk us through the probation officer meeting, this idea that Donald Trump had firearms. He still has one firearm. Does he have to surrender that? You practice in New York, so you are a little bit closer to it than I am, and you've been speaking to a lot of New York criminal lawyers about this case as well. Break it down for us, Michael Pobuck.
Okay, Ben. So the process is we got a 34 count felon. Will be adjudged a felon on July the 11th during that sentencing hearing. In the meantime, the judge takes in input from Donald Trump. Defense will write a sentencing memo, arguing, I'm sure, for nothing. Arguing again because it'll be a campaign screed masquerading as a sentencing memo. So I'm sure when we see it, and I think it's coming up this week, the week coming up, that it will be an argument for why there's reversible error and the judge overstepped his boundaries and he let evidence in that he shouldn't have, and he'll be reversed on appeal. And or if there is any sentence, it should be suspended until an appeal happens, and or it should happen till after the election. Otherwise, it's election interference. It'll all kind of get wrapped up there. Prosecutors are going to have to do the same thing. Prosecutors are going to have to make their sentencing memo, which comes in later June, towards the end of June, about 2 weeks before the sentencing hearing. And they'll put in, their survey of, there's no real comparable, there's no real exemplar for what a former president interfering with the election in order to get reelected. There's no comparison for that. But they will talk about the thousands and thousands of other people or companies that have been convicted of similar crimes. Yes, first-time offenders, but what they've received, and they'll argue for some sort of, I'm sure, incarceration. What the shape of that is, the contours of that are unclear. Is it home confinement? Is it on an army base? Where is it? Because any incarceration means that the judge is sending the Secret Service to jail as well. Because by law, for now and for the foreseeable future, Donald Trump is entitled to Secret Service protection. And so that's got to weigh on the mind of Judge Merchan as well. Then the third piece of the puzzle of an input into Judge Merchan's ultimate decision, because he makes the decision with broad discretion to do so as a trial judge in New York, comes from the probation department, which is an independent agency that's responsible for putting together a package of material and a pre-sentencing memo and recommendations to the judge. Part of it is an interview with a convicted defendant. That usually takes place in person. Since COVID, they've been allowing some people to do it by video. The judge cut Donald Trump a little bit of a break and allowed Todd Blanche, his lead defense lawyer, to be in the room for the Zoom interview that lasted apparently about 30 minutes. I assume it lasted so short because most of what you need to know about Donald Trump for sentencing purposes is already in the public record. Just because the probation person spent 30 minutes doing the live interview, I don't think reflects the amount of a dossier that they are preparing about one Donald J. Trump, his past record, his past civil fraud record, findings against him by judges that he committed fraud or perjury when he testified or lied under oath, civil judgments against him. All of these things are public. And so putting together a litigation report, a how many times has this guy been convicted or prosecuted report is in the public record. We know it, we do it, but probation can do it too. So that's not what they were trying to get out from him. They weren't going to waste anybody's time asking him about, acting like they didn't know who he was. Like, have you ever had a civil fraud judgment against you? Yes. So they had all that. So they wanted to get down because it is a part of a due process to have the defendant who's now been convicted speak. And if he shows contrition, to note that in the sentencing, we're confident that Donald Trump did not show contrition. To show acceptance of responsibility, that would be noted. We're sure he did not accept responsibility. There's a psychological background thing that may or may not have happened already that should be happening before it goes to the judge. And then when they're done with that, and in this interview is where you and I reported about the revelations about the guns. We were all floored here on Legal AF when we learned in March that Donald Trump had weapons and had an active concealed weapons permit in the state of New York, which, by the way, is very hard to get until the Supreme Court made a recent ruling 2 years ago. It was almost impossible to get a concealed weapons permit. Somehow he got it and had apparently 3 firearms. Okay. He turned in 2 of the 3 firearms, either didn't disclose the existence of the third or failed to turn it in. Because as a condition of his release, this is all before conviction. A felon holding firearms is a different issue. We'll get to that in a minute. Pre-conviction, while you're just a garden variety defendant in a criminal process, as a condition of your release in 4 different criminal cases around the country, every one of them said you can't have a firearm. And it's for a good reason. We don't want law enforcement, if they have to go serve you with a subpoena or a search warrant or go pick you up because you violated the terms of your release, they don't want to have, the person have weapons. It's a good reason. So he turned in 2 out of the 3, but he disclosed that at Mar-a-Lago, he had a third weapon that he never turned in, which is a violation of his terms of his release everywhere. And I'm sure the prosecutors are scrambling to go look into it. The Palm Beach, Florida, the town of Palm Beach police department, having been alerted about it, say they're investigating, because you're not allowed to have, a felon is, now we're into the world of felons, terms of release or otherwise. If you're not allowed to have a gun, the local police want to know about that, as may in the case of Mar-a-Lago and DC, the Department of Justice and the FBI. So that was it only took Donald Trump, I don't know, 20 minutes into a 30-minute interview to reveal that he probably violated terms of his conditions of his release and probably crimes. Now that he is a convicted felon, or will be on July 11th when the judgment of conviction is entered against him formally, along with the sentence, he can't have guns. And so if he has them and he hasn't turned them in, then that's another crime. We just saw a person related to the president who for 11 days had a handgun that he probably shouldn't have had, a revolver, and just got convicted. So it is serious business, and it's risky for him not to have done that. Now, with that information and the filings that you and I will be able to report on, the first one, I think Trump's first, his sentencing recommendations. Then the last word is the prosecutors, and then it goes right to that hearing. It won't be a live hearing or audio recorded or video recorded, but we'll be able to get people into the room and understand what happens there. And then, as you're right, Ben, the judge has a difficult thing to balance here. On one hand, you've got somebody who, in all of the bad conduct that was not allowed to go to the jury to try to convict Donald Trump, is fair game in sentencing. So all of the acting out in court, outside of court, bashing the process, bashing the judge, all of that can sort of go into the judge's stew of what he's going to mete out as a punishment. So if Donald Trump thought, I get away with it, all these bicycle rack interviews that he gave, all these hot mic moments all around, they'll all be factored in. And if the prosecutors don't pull it all together in their filing, then then you can be assured that the clerks for the court will also put that together. And the fact that he hasn't showed remorse, Trump, he hasn't accepted responsibility, and he made the prosecutors spend 2.5 years and hard-earned taxpayer dollars investigating, prosecuting him, going through a 6-week trial, putting on 23 or so witnesses. You don't get credit for that. And you normally, as Karen said in a recent interview that she gave with Huffington Post, usually that means the whole prison sentence thing is amped up and the judge throws the book at you. If you had cut a deal earlier, which we knew he would never in our wildest dreams ever do, but if he and his lawyers went to the prosecutors earlier and said, you know what, this is a misdemeanor at best, we'll take a misdemeanor, recommend probation or whatever, slap on the wrist, and we'll take it. I'm not saying the prosecutors would have taken it, but Trump certainly wasn't going to go do that. And so he made the people go through an entire trial, and there should be repercussions for that at the time of sentencing. I think, I'll leave it with this, Ben, I think that the way the judge sort of threads the needle here is that he's going to put together a package of sentence components. One part of it's going to be, I believe, some sort of incarceration. I don't know if that's home confinement or that's real jail or something like that, but there's going to be. I don't know if that's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. I don't think a year, somewhere in there. And then all these other things, probation and community service and some sort of fine. And then I think he's going to, taking a page out of what Judge Nichols did in the Bannon case, which, although federal, sort of is a recent exemplar, is that he'll allow him to be out pending an appeal. He'll give him a deadline to file his appeal. And pending that appeal, which could take a year to 18 months in the New York court system, starting with the first department, the intermediary court that sits in Manhattan, and then going up to the Court of Appeals in New York, he'll let him stay out because first-time offender, nonviolent crime, until that appeal runs. And just like we saw with Bannon, after 18 months, the judge said, okay, enough is enough. You now have to report in July for it to go to prison. And so I think that's how he'll do it, to allow him to still be campaigner Trump, see what happens in November. Not that that would affect the sentencing. Sentencing would already be given out. But in terms of when he would have to report, I don't think he's going to say, okay, sheriff, take off your belt and your shoes. You're going now, with the sheriffs here, with the bailiffs here, and you're going to be taken away. I want to manage expectations. I do not believe that is going to happen on July the 11th.
I spoke recently with a former federal prosecutor who said, one of the implications of Trump's behavior that's not getting enough attention is the message it is sending to other criminals about our criminal justice system, that you can somehow not take our criminal justice system seriously, that it is totally for sale, that you can behave like Donald Trump and not have consequences. And that is the exact opposite precedent that needs to be set, especially by people who purport to be leaders. And when the Republican Party invites Donald Trump to the Capitol Hill Club after already being found to be an adjudicated rapist, after Donald Trump's already found to have been found liable for massive civil fraud, liable for defamation, liable over and over again, and now a convicted felon, it sends a message to the country, and it's not a good one, and it's not why you and I went to law school, and it's not what our values of law and order should be. One other point I'll just mention too is, as of this show, Justice Merchan has not ruled yet on Donald Trump's request to be let out of the gag order. Recall that Donald Trump previously made that request in a letter motion. The district attorney's office opposed that. And what we can say right now is Justice Merchan is certainly not taking any sort of urgent or emergency action in response to Donald Trump's request that was presented now about 2 weeks ago or so. So we will keep monitoring that. I've predicted that eventually when Donald Trump tries to back out of the debate, one of the excuses that he's going to make is that the gag order is in effect and he won't be able to do the debate, among other things. He'll claim that President Biden's on drugs. He'll claim that it's all rigged, and he'll make a number of other excuses. But I wanted to put that on everybody's radar as well.
Welcome back. We do that podcast that we call Legal AF for a reason on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then on audio podcast platforms of your choice. If you like lawyers talking about things they know what they're talking about at the intersection of law and politics, you've come to the right place, Legal AF. And if you know about us already, we thank you for being part of our audience. Take that clip, send it off to friends and family, and ask them to join our audience. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that was Legal AF, and we do it Wednesdays and Saturdays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We invite you to come along for the ride. So until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popak reporting. Heary, heary, Legal AF Law Breakdown is now in session. Go beyond the headlines and get a deep dive into the important legal concepts you need to know, and we discuss every day on Legal AF. Exclusive content you won't find anywhere else, all for the price of a couple of cups of coffee. Join us at patreon.com/legalaf. That's patreon.com/legalaf.